Hello, and welcome to our webinar on post acquisition culture, blending teams successfully. I'm your host today, Jay Douglas, Vice President of Strategic Markets at Oak Street Funding. Joining me today is Emily Blue, founder of Hue Partners. Today, we'll discuss what it really takes to blend teams successfully after an acquisition and where firms often run into challenges early on. We will explore how firms can retain momentum, support employees through transition, how to avoid cultural disconnects, and a lot more. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jay, for having me.
To start us off, Emily, would you mind telling our audience about yourself and Hugh Partners?
Yeah, of course. So this topic is so timely and so near and dear to my heart. So my whole career I have spent on the M&A front. I actually got my start on the buy side. And my role was really centered around fulfilling the promises that were made during the M&A journey. Some of those promises that were documented, of course, in the legal documents and some of the softer promises that were made throughout the courting process. And so really understood the importance of team integration, cultural integration, and really had a deep appreciation for that. From there, I actually switched from the asset management side of M&A over to wealth management and really focused on valuing, structuring, and negotiating. So there's not a single investment bank in the country that I haven't sat across the table from and negotiated on behalf of the buy side firm that I was with. I was fortunate enough to meet a fellow, M&A friend in the industry that was also on the buy side, and he made a comment saying that, his heart was really with the sellers, and that really stuck with me. I love M&A, but what I loved the most is working and representing and collaborating with the founders and leaders of the RIA that have bet on themselves, that have, stepped out there and really built something from the ground up and really helping them navigate their, legacy. And so that was really how Hugh Partners was born. It was really born from the lens of taking the best of what we have seen, improving on some of the sore areas and pain points that, founders navigated through as they were going through their M&A journey with other investment banks throughout the years that we had the, privilege of seeing. And, we have been, very, very dedicated ever since. We only work with RIAs that are looking to sell. We don't do any work with the buyers. We work with buyers through the processes, but none of the buyers are our clients, which we think is really important and special about Hue. So that is kind of Hue in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for sharing your background and really some outstanding experience. Something you talked about within that experience, though, was culture. And let's jump into that. What is the biggest cultural challenge firms face immediately after an acquisition closes?
Change is really hard, and change impacts culture in unique ways, right? When you think about the change box and navigating change, sometimes change can be misinterpreted as cultural misalignment. So if you have one way of doing something, I have a different, we both have strong, conviction in why we do what we do and how we do it. It can create these little friction points, and so that's the biggest challenge with integration is navigating that change box and recognizing that change does not mean cultural misalignment and integration is temporary.
Wonderful. So we're going to keep going here with a lot more questions for you. How can leadership set a shared vision early so legacy teams feel united instead of divided?
Yeah. When you think about leadership, the role that they play is so significant in creating that unification. If leadership waits until after close to start to try to build those inroads that you mentioned, often what they're going to find is they waited too long, right? When you can start building those relationships, those inroads, coming together and having leadership share why they were excited to partner with that firm in the first place, to share the vision, to tell stories, to offer one on ones. When you do that work prior to close, when everybody needs to roll up their sleeves and start the integration work, you're 10 steps ahead and you have a foundation and a relationship that you build off of at that point. So starting early is one of the biggest keys to success.
Well, let's elaborate more on that. What steps help preserve the strengths of each firm's culture while still building something new together?
Yeah, when you think about preserving culture, I think one of the biggest things that you should focus on is there's a difference between the macro culture of the firm and the micro culture of each individual office across, maybe the country or the region. And so the macro culture, think about it through the lens of everybody sharing a common set of values, a vision, a purpose, and that alignment keeps everybody rowing within the firm in the same direction. The the microculture, on the other hand, is, within an office, they may have, a certain way of doing something, and that is okay. They may operate a little bit differently. They may conduct, meetings at a different cadence or whatever that may look like that's special and unique to that particular office. You can preserve the microculture while, integrating into the macro culture. One of the best steps that we see firms take as it relates to cultural integration and that preservation of strong culture is really taking some time to unpack with the team that's being integrated and the acquired firm is really highlight what isn't changing, because it's easy to feel like everything is changing around them and everything they know is different now. But if you first say, yes, integration by nature and definition equals change, and change is hard and it's temporary. But if you say, okay, here's the things that are not changing, and you anchor around the things that are not changing while creating line of sight to the things that are and the timeline for when that will happen, that will really help kind of anchor and ground and preserve culture, attitudes, uh, during a time of, integration and change.
Yeah. How should leaders, so through this integration and change, how should leaders communicate during those first 90 days to build trust and reduce uncertainty among the employees, both being integrated into and the employees coming to integrate?
Such a great question. Because when you think about trust, if you don't have trust, you have nothing. And to really build that trust, it's quite simple. It's the people are looking to see, do the actions align with the words and the promises that were made? Are you doing what you said you would do when you said you would do it? Because there's a lot, for a firm that's going through an integration, there's a lot of things and expectations, milestones and deadlines that are being put on them to kind of work through as a team. So their willingness to roll up their sleeves and hit those milestones as a team for the greater good of the firm is really, it hinges on is the leadership and the fellow, departmental leaders. Are they doing what they said they would do too, right? And so that's really important. When you think about the first 90 days, if you've made promises, if you say you're going to do something, make sure you do it when you said you're going to do it, because people are watching and, monitoring that, and that builds trust, and then it continues to build off of each other. The other thing, there's this old saying that, it takes you have to hear it like 7 times for it to stick. And that is so true in integration. You have to hear it so many times in different formats, in different ways, by different leaders for it to really start to stick. And so when you think about communication, to your question, really think about it through the lens of, Are you communicating in a singular way? Are you communicating only verbally on team calls? Or are you only communicating over an email and making these asks? So make sure your communication touches a variety of mediums, but verbally and email, visual, utilize timelines and celebrate milestones. Those really will create a significant amount of momentum in those first 90 days.
Let's talk about maybe when things don't go so well. Where do culture clashes most often appear from your experience?
Yeah, cultural clashes, if you were to boil it down to like, when does that happen? It really tends to happen in 2 arenas. It comes in the form of decision making, and it comes in the form of communication. And as you know, those 2 go hand in hand. And so the best way to, prevent a cultural clash is if you're trying to influence change, you have to first ask yourself, did I listen and did I learn from the other side before I started going down the path of trying to share the decision that's being made? Did I appear and did I, come across as open-minded genuinely, because there are
Mhm.
going to be things where a potential partner firm, they may be doing something different than you, but it actually might be better. And if you take the opportunity to first listen and learn before you communicate change and decisions that are made around change, that prevents some of those clashings. Because what happens is when a decision is made without listening and learning first, it doesn't those decisions aren't received well, which causes the other side to show up as not their best self. And it just further feeds this clash and creates a setback. So I do think, if you had to isolate where those clashes occur, it's in decision making and communicating. And so the sensitivity around how decisions are being made, how decisions are being communicated, and how you guys collaborate through those is everything.
Are there ever situations where maybe there could be a red flag to a potential cultural issue? And, how early before they impact retention or morale? Are there ways to identify potential those red flags?
Yeah. So when you think about red flags, very, very rarely do you actually see a situation go from a series of green lights and green flags to red. If we're really being honest, there are a lot of little signals where a flag will go from green to yellow to maybe orange and then it's red, that's more common versus it just going from green one day to a red flag fire drill the next. And what's important is there's often these little subtle signs. And when leadership waits to step in or support until the flag has been escalated, often if you wait until it's just been escalated, you are just sitting there waiting for red flags to come to you. It takes the regular check-ins, regular dialogue, you know, a high emotional intelligence of recognizing how people are reacting and responding to change and news and monitoring those kind of temperatures along the way. Because if you do that, it's much easier to take something that went from green to a yellow or orange flag and de-escalate it down to a yellow or a green flag. It's much more difficult to, de-escalate a red flag to a green flag, right? And so if you are, aware and you're monitoring, you're doing regular check-ins, you're listening to your people, you'll start to pick up on those little subtleties of something where it starts to trend in a different direction. You can start to kind of course correct much easier.
To keep the questions coming at you, what onboarding practices help new teams feel included rather than absorbed or replaced?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that gets misconstrued about onboarding is that it's an HR function. And yes, there are significant amount of things that, relate to the HR department when it comes to onboarding, but the most successful acquirers are actually treating onboarding as the very first step to integration. And if you nail successful onboarding, then integration is set on a really great trajectory. And how do you do that? One of the very best ways that we have seen firms onboard is make it a collective firm-wide initiative to welcome, your new partner firm. So every department has some level of involvement to varying degrees with a firm that's joining. And so having the opportunity to, engage and meet the different departments and really have the new firm understand that if there's an operations question or a technology question, who do you go? And who do you go to and call? And so we've seen firms create these like cheat sheets with like headshots and like for each department with like who to go to, and it seems, it's silly because, like, you and I are, have not been, the new person before, but when you are in that first 90 days and you have, a reference guide of, like, who to go to, you don't feel like you're, spinning your wheels. And so when firms treat it as a firm-wide initiative, a lot of the times those departments are bringing people in, inviting them to meetings, and incorporating them in the daily workflow of the business, which makes them feel really included versus kind of like out on an island.
How do successful firms measure whether the culture integration, the onboarding is really working just beyond the financial results?
Yeah, and it's easy for a firm to, especially in wealth management, to look at the financial metrics, to look at revenue, new clients, and pay attention to those things. And they are important, right? It's like the fuel of the firm. But those non-financial metrics and benchmarks are just as important to monitor, and so the best litmus test for that is look at the newly acquired and partnered with firm and see, are they interacting with other teams? Are they sharing and seeking best practices from other colleagues around the firm? Are they sharing and gaining wisdom on the new resources and tools and really trying to utilize them? They're not going to utilize every single tool, and every single resource right out of the gate for all their clients. But if you can start to see some of those steps being made and that collaboration amongst that office with your other offices, with your leadership, and all across the organization, that is the very best test of, is your cultural integration working? When you see a firm sitting and kind of trying to stay in their silo and trying to kind of protect just their office and not engage with, other departments or other offices, not going to the, events, like that's a signal of like how can you kind of weave them back into the fold and get them more engaged. So that's really the very best litmus test for cultural integration.
Looking back at all the integrations that you've done that have went well, and there's a question coming up after this about ones that don't go well, so maybe start thinking about that one. But for the ones that went well, what is one cultural decision that made the biggest difference long term?
Yes. So the biggest difference that we have seen firms take as it relates to successful integrations is recognizing the people that are the most impacted by integration. And that is not the advisor, but it's the service team, it's the operations team, and really spending the time to appreciate, to share the vision, to understand the why behind the change, to really invest in building those relationships with the service and the operations teams. That will make a huge difference on the morale, the eagerness to, roll up the sleeves to work through the change. And so that is the biggest difference, is when a firm actually recognizes where integration, is felt the most and then directs intentional energy around supporting and lifting and incentivizing. that team to keep rowing.
Absolutely. Well, maybe a quick story on one that maybe didn't go so well and what was maybe the identifiers of that.
Yeah, one of the integrations that I've seen, like, not go well, and it was not done with, bad intentions, right? Like, the buyer was trying to be respectful of their future partner and not overwhelm them, and so they held back their departments and their integration teams to get involved until after the transaction. So put yourself in the shoes of the new partner firm. The deal closes, it's day 1, and all of a sudden, all those people that have been waiting to and eager to kinda get involved are now reaching out and pinging and sending requests, and you're like, "Who is that person? And is this the, urgent thing, or is that the urgent thing?" And you can't tell priority. And you get lost, and you get overwhelmed, and then it just continues to kinda compound, because everybody knows that feeling of when you're getting the follow-up email on something that you haven't quite gotten to, but you're not sure when to get to it or how to get to it, and so not having those relationships and those inroads and kind of understanding who's who prior to the integration work getting done, that can really, set someone up for a rocky integration.
Well, Emily, we've unfortunately come to the end of our time. I want to thank you for being here today and sharing your insights. Three things that I took away was for integrations, we have to listen and learn first. Really key. Uh, we have to do what we say we're going to do when we say we're going to do it. And then lastly, that communicate in multiple ways. That, not everybody listens the same way. So some really outstanding stuff for firms that are thinking about pursuing a potential integration acquisition at some point. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to our audience who tuned in and submitted questions today. We appreciate your continued viewership. We want you to stay tuned for more from us here at Oak Street Funding with new content and new guests always coming. Thanks again.
Thank you.